Section 16 of Confessions, volumes 5 and 6. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Confessions, volumes 5 and 6, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, anonymously translated. Section 16. My health was not yet re-established. I decayed visibly, was pale as death, and reduced to an absolute skeleton. The beating of my arteries was extreme, my palpitations were frequent, I was sensible of a continual oppression, and my weakness became at length so great that I could scarcely move or step without danger of suffocation, stoop without vertigos, or lift even the smallest weight, which reduced me to the most tormenting inaction for a man so naturally stirring as myself. It is certain my disorder was in a great measure hypochondriacal. The vapors is a malady common to people in fortunate situations. The tears I frequently shed without reason, the lively alarms I felt on the falling of a leaf, or the fluttering of a bird, inequality of humor in the calm of a most pleasing life, lassitude, which made me weary even of happiness, and carried sensibility to extravagance, were instances of this. We are so little formed for felicity, that when the soul and body do not suffer together, they must necessarily endure separate inconveniences, the good state of the one being almost always injurious to the happiness of the other. Had all the pleasures of life courted me, my weakened frame would not have permitted the enjoyment of them, without my being able to particularize the real seat of my complaint. Yet in the decline of life, after having encountered very serious and real evils, my body seemed to regain its strength, as if on purpose to encounter additional misfortunes. And at the moment I write this, though infirm, near 60, and overwhelmed with every kind of sorrow, I feel more ability to suffer than I ever possessed for enjoyment when in the very flower of my age, and in the bosom of real happiness. To complete me, I had mingled a little physiology among my other readings. I set about studying anatomy, and considering the multitude, movement, and wonderful construction of the various parts that composed the human machine, my apprehensions were instantly increased. I expected to feel mine deranged 20 times a day, and far from being surprised to find myself dying, was astonished that I yet existed. I could not read the description of any malady without thinking it mine, and had I not been already indisposed, I am certain I should have become so from this study. Finding in every disease symptoms similar to mine, I fancied I had them all, and at length gained one more troublesome than any I had yet suffered, which I had thought myself delivered from. This was a violent inclination to seek a cure, which is very difficult to suppress when once a person begins reading physical books. By searching, reflecting, and comparing, I became persuaded that the foundation of my complaint was a polypus at the heart. And Dr. Salomon appeared to coincide with the idea. Reasonably, this opinion should have confirmed my former resolution of considering myself past cure. This, however, was not the case. On the contrary, I exerted every power of my understanding in search of a remedy for a polypus, resolving to undertake this marvelous cure. In a journey which Anet had made to Montpellier, to see the physic garden there, and visit Monsieur Sauvage, the demonstrator, he had been informed that Monsieur Fils had cured a polypus similar to that I fancied myself afflicted with. Madame de Warrens, recollecting this circumstance, mentioned it to me, and nothing more was necessary to inspire me with a desire to consult Monsieur Fils. The hope of recovery gave me courage and strength to undertake the journey. The money from Geneva furnished the means. Madame de Warrens, far from dissuading, entreated me to go. Behold me, therefore, without further ceremony, set out for Montpellier. But it was not necessary to go so far to find the cure I was in search of. Finding the motion of the horse too fatiguing, I had hired a chaise at Grenoble, and on entering Moirans, 5 or 6 other chaises arrived in a rank after mine. The greater part of these were in the train of a new married lady called Madame du Colombier. With her was a Madame de Larnage, not so young or handsome as the former, yet not less amiable. The bride was to stop at Romans, but the other lady was to pursue her route as far as Saint Andiol, near the Pont du Saint Esprit. With my natural timidity, it will not be conjectured that I was very ready at forming an acquaintance with these fine ladies, and the company that attended them; but travelling the same road, lodging at the same inns, and being obliged to eat at the same table, the acquaintance seemed unavoidable, as any backwardness on my part would have got me the character of a very unsociable being. It was formed then, and even sooner than I desired, for all this bustle was by no means convenient to a person in ill health, particularly to one of my humor. Curiosity renders these vixens extremely insinuating. They accomplish their design of becoming acquainted with a man by endeavoring to turn his brain, and this was precisely what happened to me. Madame du Colombier was too much surrounded by her young gallants to have any opportunity of paying much attention to me. Besides, it was not worth while, as we were to separate in so short a time. But Madame de Larnage, less attended to than her young friend, had to provide herself for the remainder of the journey. Behold me then, attacked by Madame de Larnage, and adieu to poor Jean-Jacques, or rather farewell to fever, vapors, and polypus, all completely vanished when in her presence. The ill state of my health was the first subject of our conversation. They saw I was indisposed, knew I was going to Montpellier, but my air and manner certainly did not exhibit the appearance of a libertine, since it was clear by what followed they did not suspect I was going there for a reason that carries many that road. In the morning they sent to inquire after my health and invite me to take chocolate with them, and when I made my appearance, asked how I had passed the night. Once, according to my praiseworthy custom of speaking without thought, I replied, I did not know, which answer naturally made them conclude I was a fool. But on questioning me further, the examination turned out so far to my advantage that I rather rose in their opinion, and I once heard Madame du Colombier say to her friend, "He is amiable, but not sufficiently acquainted with the world." These words were a great encouragement, and assisted me in rendering myself agreeable. As we became more familiar, it was natural to give each other some little account of whence we came, and who we were. This embarrassed me greatly, for I was sensible that in good company, and among women of spirit, the very name of a new convert would utterly undo me. I know not by what whimsicality I resolved to pass for an Englishman. However, in consequence of that determination, I gave myself out for a Jacobite, and was readily believed. They called me Monsieur Dudding, which was the name I assumed with my new character, and a cursed Marquis Torignan, who was one of the company, an invalid like myself, and both old and ill tempered, took it in his head to begin a long conversation with me. He spoke of King James, of the Pretender, and the old court of Saint Germain. I sat on thorns the whole time, for I was totally unacquainted with all these, except what little I had picked up in the account of Earl Hamilton, and from the gazettes. However, I made such fortunate use of the little I did know as to extricate myself from this dilemma, happy in not being questioned on the English language, which I did not know a single word of. The company were all very agreeable. We looked forward to the moment of separation with regret, and therefore made snails' journeys. We arrived one Sunday at Saint Marcellin's. Madame de Larnage would go to mass. I accompanied her, and had nearly ruined all my affairs, for by my modest, reserved countenance during the service, she concluded me a bigot, and conceived a very indifferent opinion of me, as I learned from her own account 2 days after. It required a great deal of gallantry on my part to efface this ill impression, or rather Madame de Larnage, who was not easily disheartened, determined to risk the first advances, and see how I should behave. She made several, but far from being presuming on my figure, I thought she was making sport of me. Full of this ridiculous idea, there was no folly I was not guilty of. Madame de Larnage persisted in such caressing behavior, that a much wiser man than myself could hardly have taken it seriously. The more obvious her advances were, the more I was confirmed in my mistake, and what increased my torment, I found I was really in love with her. I frequently said to myself, and sometimes to her, sighing, "Ah, why is this not all real? Then should I be the most fortunate of men." I am inclined to think my stupidity did but increase her resolution, and make her determined to get the better of it. We left Madame du Colombier at Romans, after which Madame de Larnage, the Marquis de Torignan, and myself continued our route slowly, and in the most agreeable manner. The Marquis, though indisposed, and rather ill humored, was an agreeable companion, but was not best pleased at seeing the lady bestow all her attentions on me, while he passed unregarded; for Madame de Larnage took so little care to conceal her inclination, that he perceived it sooner than I did, and his sarcasms must have given me that confidence I could not presume to take from the kindness of the lady, if by a surmise, which no one but myself could have blundered on, I had not imagined they perfectly understood each other, and were agreed to turn my passion into ridicule. This foolish idea completed my stupidity, making me act the most ridiculous part, while, had I listened to the feelings of my heart, I might have been performing one far more brilliant. I am astonished that Madame de Larnage was not disgusted at my folly, and did not discard me with disdain, but she plainly perceived there was more bashfulness than indifference in my composition. End of section 16. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.